Have you ever come home after a long day when you're super tired, your brain is still running on work mode, right? And you walk in the door to what feels like only mildly controlled chaos. The kids are super loud, dinner is halfway done, somebody lost a shoe, and your spouse looks at you with that look. You know the one I'm talking about, right? It's not anger exactly, it's something heavier. It's exhaustion mixed with something you can't quite name. So you jump in, you say the magic words. What do you need me to do? And you mean it. You want to help. You start loading the dishwasher, you wrangle the kids for bath time. You feel good about it. You showed up, you helped. But here's the part that most dads miss. That word help is quietly doing damage to your marriage. And I know that sounds dramatic, but stay with me because this is one of the most important realizations you can have as a husband and as a father. When you say, I help around the house, what you're really communicating, whether you mean to or not, is that the house is your spouse's responsibility and you're just the assistant. You're the guy who shows up when asked. You're the relief pitcher, not the co-captain. And your spouse has become the project manager of your entire home life. They're tracking the grocery list, the school calendar, the doctor's appointments, the birthday gifts, the permission slips, who needs new socks, when is the dog due for shots, right? All of it, every single day. And if your spouse is the project manager of your home, you don't have a partner, you have a manager. And nobody, and I mean nobody, wants to feel like they're managing their spouse as an employee. They don't need another kid to manage. That kills connection, that kills intimacy, and that breeds resentment like nothing else. Welcome to beabossdad.com. My name is Joel Haasenritter, and I help high-achieving dads scale their business without failing their family. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to go from being the guy your spouse has to manage to being the partner they actually feel supported by. I'm talking about the shift from I help out to I've got this. By the end of this conversation, you're going to understand exactly why the current dynamic in your home is draining your marriage. And you're going to walk away with a clear, actionable plan to rebuild genuine partnership, reignite connection with your spouse, and become the kind of leader at home that your family deserves. This one conversation could be the turning point for everything. And I say all of this not to throw guilt. It isn't about blame. This is about becoming the kind of leader at home that you already are at work. It's about becoming the strategic shepherd of your family, not just the guy who takes out the trash when asked. So let's get into it. So let's get really clear on something. There is a massive difference between helping and owning. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Helping looks like this. Your spouse says, can you pick up the milk on the way home? We've probably all been asked that, right? So you do. You pick up the milk. Done. Good job. Gold star. Owning looks like this. You notice the milk is low. You add it to the grocery list. You pick it up on your way home. Nobody had to ask. Nobody had to remind you. Nobody had to manage you. I'm sure you see the difference, right? In the first scenario, your spouse still had to do the cognitive work. They had to notice the milk was low, remember to tell you, figure out the right time to ask, and then trust that you'd actually follow through. And because you might not hear it from anyone else, I got to ask, can she actually trust you to follow through? In this scenario, yes, you did the physical task, but they carried the mental weight. In the second scenario, you carried the whole thing, beginning to end. You noticed, you planned, you executed. That's ownership. And here's why this matters so much. Think about how you operate at work. If you're running a business or leading a team, you don't wait for someone to tell you what to do every day. You anticipate problems before they become real problems. You see what needs to happen, you take initiative, you own outcomes, not just tasks. But so many of us, myself included at one point, we come home and we flip into this passive mode where we're waiting for instructions. We become the employee of our household. And the reason we do this isn't necessarily because we're lazy or that we don't care. It's because we've never been taught to see the invisible work. A researcher named Allison Daminger, and I apologize if I just butchered that name, at the University of Wisconsin, broke cognitive labor down into 4 stages. She calls them anticipate, identify, decide, and monitor. So anticipating means realizing there's a need before it becomes a crisis. And I'm sure you can see the parallel in your business and in your home. Identifying means figuring out the options. Deciding means choosing the solution, and monitoring means following through and making sure it actually happens. That's what we call the definition of success in the business world, right? Here's the kicker. In most households, one partner, usually the spouse, who has taken on the role of household manager is doing all 4 of those stages for almost every task. The other partner, often us, is only showing up at the execution phase. We do the thing, but we didn't anticipate, identify, decide, or plan for the thing. We just did what we were told. You start to resent her because she's always telling you things that need to be done, and she starts resenting you because she keeps having to tell you that things need to be done. And when that imbalance goes on for months and years, and we see it in relationships all the time, right? It doesn't matter how many dishes you wash. Your spouse is still carrying that weight of the entire operation in their head, and that weight is crushing. So the first shift we need to make as boss dads is this: stop being a helper and start being an owner. Not an owner in the controlling sense, an owner in the I see it, I've got it, you don't have to worry about this sense. That's what a true partner does. So let's go deeper on this, because I think a lot of us hear this word, quote unquote, mental load, and we think it's just a trendy buzzword. But the research on this is real, and it explains a lot of the tension that builds in marriages, especially for high-achieving families where both people are running at full speed. A 2024 study from the University of Southern California surveyed over 300 mothers and found that moms reported being responsible for about 73% of all cognitive household labor and 64% of all physical household labor. And get this, the only task out of 30 where fathers did more of the planning and execution was taking out the trash. That's 1 out of 30. That same study found a direct link between that cognitive burden and increased depression, stress, burnout, and of course, reduced relationship satisfaction. So again, I'm not sharing this to pile on the guilt. I've talked about that guilt sandwich before in previous videos. It's already eating most of us alive as high-achieving fathers. You already feel guilty at work for not being at home, and guilty at home for thinking about work. So I don't want to add to that, okay? So hear me on that. But I do want you to understand what's actually happening in your spouse's brain every single day, because when you see it, you can start to change it. So let me translate this into boss dad language. Here's what mental load actually feels like for the person carrying it. Imagine you're in a meeting at work, but in the back of your mind, you're also running a second operating system. That system is tracking that your kid needs a permission slip signed by tomorrow, that the pediatrician appointment needs to be rescheduled, that your in-laws are coming next week and the guest room sheets need washing, that your daughter's best friend has a peanut allergy and the birthday party that's coming up, the snacks need to be nut-free, and that your son has been quiet lately and maybe you should check in. That's not a to-do list, right? That's a full-time job of anticipation and planning and worry that runs in the background 24 hours a day, where it hits your marriage directly. When your spouse is carrying all of that mental load, they don't have the emotional bandwidth left to connect with you. They're not withholding affection or being distant because they're angry. They're depleted. They're running on empty because the mental labor of managing the household has consumed every ounce of energy. And what do? We come home and say, hey, what's wrong? Or why are you in a bad mood? And that makes it worse because now they're having to explain the invisible. They have to justify why they're exhausted when, quote unquote, nothing really happened today. And this is how connection dies. Not with a big fight necessarily, not with some dramatic event. It dies slowly over time in the quiet resentment that builds when one person is carrying that cognitive weight and the other person doesn't even know it exists. So if you've been feeling like there's a wall between you and your spouse, like your roommates managing logistics instead of partners building a life together, mental load is quite likely a major factor. And the good news is, again, that once you can see it, you can start to fix it. Let me paint a picture that I think will hit home for a lot of you. You're a business owner, or you're in a leadership role at some capacity of your business. Imagine one of your employees came to you every single day and said, "Hey, boss, what should I work on today?" Every day. No initiative, no ownership, just waiting to be told what to do. How long would you keep that employee around? Not long, right? Because what you need are people who can see the work, own the work, and execute the work without you having to micromanage every detail. Now, flip that. That's what your spouse is experiencing at home when they have to direct every household task, when they have to say, "Can you start the laundry?" Or "Don't forget we have that thing on Saturday," or "The kids need lunch packed for tomorrow still." Each one of those instructions feels small, but the cumulative effect is massive. Your spouse has become the manager of the household, and you've become the employee who clocks in when told. Here's the sneaky part about all of that is that when your spouse does bring it up, when they say, "I need more help," or "I'm overwhelmed," we often respond with, "Just tell me what to do and I'll do it." And we mean it with a good heart, right? We genuinely want to help. But that response actually makes the problem worse because it confirms that they are the manager. It says, "You keep running the operation, just assign me the tasks." What your spouse actually needs to hear is not, "Tell me what to do." They need to hear, "I've got this. I'm going to own this area. You don't even need to think about it anymore." That's a completely different energy. That's a partnership. That's a co-leadership. But, and this is a big but, you have to actually own it. You have to actually follow through. Because if you don't, it just becomes another mess that she has to clean up. Let me give you a practical example. In our household, I took full ownership of everything related to college logistics. Scholarship opportunities, the dreaded FAFSA application, although thankfully it's gotten better than it used to be. Brainstorming with the kids about what different career paths could look like. My spouse doesn't have to think about any of it. She doesn't have to remind me, doesn't have to check in behind me. The entire category is off the mental load. And the relief that that creates is enormous. Not because the task itself is so hard, but because it's one less thing running in the background of their brain. Now, I know some of you are probably thinking, "But my spouse does it better," or "They have a system and I don't want to mess it up." And I get that. We'll talk about different standards later. But for now, understand this. The goal isn't perfection. The goal is genuine ownership. And I promise you that your spouse would rather have you own a task at 80% of their standard than have to manage you doing it at 100%, because the management itself is the exhausting part. The role of the strategic shepherd in the B.O.S.S framework, that's balanced owner, strategic shepherd. The role of the strategic shepherd isn't just about leading your family with vision and values. It's about seeing the invisible work and stepping into it without being asked. That's what separates a true partner from even a well-meaning helper. Okay, so I know that was a lot to throw at you and probably rub some of you the wrong way. But now that we know the problem, mental load is real, helping is not the same as owning, and the invisible project manager dynamic is killing connection. The question is, how do we fix this without turning our home into a corporate org chart? Because here's what I don't want you to do. I don't want you to go home tonight and create a shared Google Sheet with every household task color-coded by owner with due dates and KPIs. I've seen people try that. It usually leads to a fight, not a fix, because the spreadsheet itself becomes another thing to manage, and it turns your marriage into a transaction, which is the opposite of what we're going for. Instead, here's what I want you to think about. Shared ownership is not about splitting every task 50-50. It's about making sure both people are carrying real cognitive weight, not just physical tasks. It's about both of you thinking, anticipating, and owning whole categories, not just checking boxes. The approach I recommend, and this comes from the Boss Dad framework under what we call the strategic shepherd pillar, is to think in terms of domains, not tasks. You know this from the corporate life, right? You know this from being an entrepreneur and a business owner. A domain is an entire area of household life. Things like meals and groceries, school and education, finances and bills, health and medical, home maintenance, the social calendar, family events, kids' activities, the list goes on, right? Each of these is a domain. And within each domain, there are dozens of tasks, just like the project that you're managing at work. Instead of splitting up individual to-do items, maybe sit down with your spouse and divide up the domains. When you own a domain, you own all 4 stages: anticipate, identify, decide, and monitor. You're not waiting to be told the kids need new shoes. You're checking their shoe size. You're noticing when they're worn out. You're ordering new ones. You're making sure they fit. And I know, you might be thinking this sounds like a big conversation, and it is, but it doesn't have to happen all at once. In fact, I'd recommend you don't try to overhaul everything in one night. Start with one domain. Pick something you're already somewhat involved in and take full ownership of it. Run it for a couple of weeks without your spouse having to remind you of anything in that area. Then come back and talk about how it went and taking another one on. The key here is the transfer of cognitive responsibility, not just the physical task. And when you take over the meals domain, for example, that means you're meal planning for the week. You're checking what's in the fridge. You're making the grocery list. You're shopping or ordering delivery, and you're prepping. Your spouse doesn't think about meals all that week. That's the freedom for her. That's what reduces that load. And here's a tool that can help you with the prioritization side of things. In our Boss Dad Accelerator, we teach something called the CARE score method. And it stands for contribution, affected, relief, and effort. It's a simple framework that you can use with your spouse to objectively prioritize household tasks and projects instead of arguing about whether fixing the fence or painting the guest room is more important. You just score each one based on how much it contributes to family well-being, how many people are affected, how much relief it provides, and how much effort it takes. And the formula is to multiply contribution times affected times relief divided by effort. Then you compare the scores and decide together. It takes the emotion out of it if it becomes too emotionally heated of conversations that you've had in the past. It takes the emotion out of it and puts you on the same team. This isn't about perfection or rigid systems. It's about moving from a dynamic where one person carries everything to a dynamic where both people are genuinely sharing the cognitive weight. That's what partnership looks like in practice. So let's get into something really practical. I want to give you 3 specific conversations you can have with your spouse that will start shifting the dynamic. These aren't scripts to memorize. They're frameworks for real, honest dialogue. And the goal of each conversation is different. So don't try to do all 3 in one night. Just space them out. Conversation 1 is the awareness talk. This is the most important conversation, honestly, and it needs to happen first. The purpose is simple. You're acknowledging what you haven't seen. You're telling your spouse, I now understand that you've been carrying something I didn't fully recognize, and I want to change that. Here's how it might sound. And again, this isn't a script, so make it your own. But the spirit of it goes like this. Hey, I've been thinking a lot about how we run things at home, and I've realized something. I've been thinking of myself as someone who helps out, but the truth is, you've been the one holding all of it together. The planning, the remembering, the anticipating, all of it. And I want you to know that I see it now. I see the weight you've been carrying, and I don't want you to carry it alone anymore. And that's it. That's the first conversation. You're not solving anything yet. You're not proposing a system. You're just seeing your spouse. You're validating their experience. And let me tell you why this matters so much. Research from the Gottman Institute, which has studied thousands of couples over decades, shows that one of the strongest predictors of relationship satisfaction is whether a partner feels seen and understood. And understanding is the foundation for trust. It's not about agreeing on everything. It's about knowing your partner truly gets what you're going through. When your spouse has been carrying the mental load and you finally say, I see it, I understand it, and it's not okay that you've been doing this alone, that's healing. That's connection. That is the first brick in rebuilding trust. And when your spouse feels understood at a deep level, an authentic level, that's when true trust is born. And let me be real with you. This conversation might not go smoothly. Your spouse might be skeptical. They might say, I've heard this before. They might be emotional because they've been holding all of this in for a long time, and that's okay. Don't get defensive. Don't try to fix it in the moment. Just listen. Let them talk. Let them feel heard. The biggest mistake that I see guys make here is they want to jump straight to solutions. And we do that pretty well as guys, right? For better or for worse. You might say, okay, great. So let's divide up the chores. No, slow down. The awareness conversation is about connection first, logistics second. If your spouse doesn't feel understood or seen, no amount of task splitting will fix the resentment. This is what we mean in the B.O.S.S Dad framework when we talk about being a strategic shepherd. A shepherd doesn't just manage the flock. A shepherd pays attention. A shepherd notices when something is off and moves toward it with care. That's the energy that you bring to this first conversation. Conversation number 2 is the domains talk. Once you've had the awareness talk and your spouse feels genuinely and authentically understood, now you can move into logistics, but not in a corporate, let's make a spreadsheet way, but in a collaborative, we're building this together way. The domains talk is where you sit down together, maybe after the kids are in bed, and just map out the major domains of your household. You can take out a sheet of paper, write them down, or a whiteboard if you want, but that probably feels a little bit more corporate. Things like meals and kids' school stuff, medical and health, finances, home maintenance, social calendars, activities and sports, bedtime routines, whatever is relevant to your specific family. Then for each domain, honestly assess who currently owns it. And by owns it, I mean who does the thinking, the planning, the anticipating, and the monitoring, not just who physically does the tasks. Be honest here. If your wife is the one who remembers the dentist appointments, researches the options, books them, and makes sure the kids get there, they own that domain, even if you're the one driving them to the appointment. Once you've mapped the current reality, talk about where you want to be. Which domains do you want to take full ownership of? Not help with, but own. And be realistic. Don't volunteer for everything in a burst of enthusiasm and then drop the ball 2 weeks later. Pick 2 or 3 domains that you can genuinely take off your spouse's plate. And here's a critical detail. When you take ownership of a domain, you also take ownership of the learning curve. If you don't know when the kid's next dentist appointment is or what size shoes they wear, that's not your wife's problem to figure out for you. You figure it out. You ask the kids. You check the records. You own the discovery, not just the execution. We do this every day, in the business world, right? We own a domain, we figure out what's coming up, we plan, we execute, and we learn and do it better the next time. The weekly family sync, I've talked about this in previous videos. It's a tool that we teach in the B.O.S.S Accelerator, and it's a great rhythm for all of this. It's a 10, 15, 20-minute weekly check-in, usually on a Sunday, where you and your spouse align on the week ahead. What's happening? Who's owning what? Where does someone need backup? It's not a status meeting. It's a team huddle. And it prevents the buildup of unspoken frustrations because you're proactively communicating every week instead of waiting for things to blow up. Now, conversation 3 is the standards talk. And this is important because it addresses one of the most common sources of friction when couples try to share the load. Here's the scenario. Let's say you take over the laundry. You're doing it, you're owning it, but you fold the towels differently, or you don't sort the colors correctly, or the bathroom doesn't get cleaned to the same level, and your spouse redoes it, or gives you feedback that feels like criticism. And then suddenly you're thinking, why did I even bother? And this is where a lot of guys give up, even good-intentioned guys. And I get it. It feels like a no-win, right? If you don't help, you're the problem. If you help but do it differently, you're still the problem. But here's the truth. Different standards don't mean one person is right and the other is wrong. It just means you haven't had an honest conversation about what good enough looks like. In the business world, you do this. You call it the definition of done, right? You come to a shared understanding and agreement of what it means to complete this domain. And this is where the standards talk comes in. The standards talk is where you and your spouse sit down and honestly discuss what level of quality matters for each domain. And this requires both sides to be flexible. For the person who's been carrying the load, the question is, can I let go of my specific way of doing this if the outcome is still good enough? Because here's the thing, if you take over meal planning and the meals are nutritious and the family is fed, but it's not exactly how your spouse would have planned it, that has to be okay if you've come to that agreement. Otherwise, you'll never truly transfer the cognitive load because your spouse will always be monitoring and correcting. And for the person stepping into ownership, the question is, am I willing to learn? Am I willing to improve and to meet a reasonable standard, even if it pushes me out of my comfort zone? This conversation is about finding the middle ground, not your standard, not my standard, but our standard, the one we both agree on and can both live with. And for some things, the standard might be lower than what the other person wants, and that's okay. The trade-off is worth it because you're getting your marriage back. The Gottman Institute's research tells us that roughly 69% of relationship conflicts are what they call perpetual problems, meaning they're never fully solved. They're managed. Different standards is one of those. You don't fix it once and then move on. You navigate it together with grace over time. And the key is how you talk about it, not whether you agree on every detail. Let me shift gears a bit and talk about something that maybe sounds boring, but is secretly one of the most powerful things you can do for your marriage. Aligning your calendars. And I don't just mean sharing a Google Calendar, although that's a good start. We have multiple calendars that we share between my wife and I. I mean sitting down with your spouse on a regular basis and actually talking through the week ahead. Who has what commitments, where the kids need to be, what deadlines are hitting at work, where the pressure points are going to be, and most importantly, where you're going to protect time for each other and time for the family. Because here's what happens. Without alignment, you both go into the week with your own assumptions. You assume your spouse knows about your Thursday night business dinner. They assume you know about the kids' Friday assembly at school, and nobody communicated. And by Wednesday, you're both frustrated because you feel like the other person doesn't care about your priorities. This is not a communication failure because someone is a bad communicator. It's a systems failure. You don't have a rhythm for alignment. And when you don't have a rhythm, you're relying on memory, which is already overloaded, and assumptions, which are almost always wrong. The weekly family sync that I mentioned earlier is designed to solve exactly this. Here's how we structure it. It's about 10 to 15 minutes, usually again on a Sunday evening, and there's 3 parts. Part 1 is logistics and events. You pull up the calendar and you walk through the week. Who needs to be where and when? What appointments are happening? What deadlines are coming? Where are the potential conflicts in your schedule? It takes just a few minutes and it prevents 90% of the "I didn't know about that" arguments. Part 2 is wins and gratitude. This is where you celebrate something from the past week. Maybe your kid crushed a test. Maybe your spouse handled a tough situation beautifully. Maybe you had a great family dinner. You take 2 minutes to acknowledge the good. And this matters because it keeps the sync from feeling like a business meeting. It reminds you both why you're doing all of this. Part 3 is this week's priority. What's the one big thing that you want to accomplish together this week? Maybe it's getting the garage organized. Maybe it's having a family game night. Maybe it's just protecting Saturday morning for pancakes with the kids. One priority, agreed on together, protected on the calendar. And that's it. 10, 15, maybe 20 minutes. And it transforms your entire week because you're starting from alignment instead of chaos. Now, I also want to talk about expectation alignment because this goes deeper than calendars. Expectations are the invisible contracts we carry in our heads about how things should work. And when those contracts don't match between you and your spouse, resentment builds really fast. For example, you might expect that weekends are for recharging and doing whatever feels good in the moment. Your spouse might expect that weekends are when all the household tasks that didn't get done throughout the week finally get handled. Neither expectation is wrong, but if you haven't talked about it, you're both going to be frustrated. The fix is simple, but it does require vulnerability. You sit down and each share your expectations for the big areas. What do you expect weekday evenings to look like? What about weekends? What about holidays? How do we handle it when one of us needs to work late? What's the default when plans change? Because if your life is like mine, plans are constantly changing. When you name the expectations out loud, you can negotiate in good faith. When they stay unspoken, they become silent scorecards that only breed resentment. All right, I want to spend some dedicated time on this because it trips up so many couples. You've decided to share the load. You've had the conversations and you're owning the domains. And then it happens. Your spouse walks into the kitchen, looks at how you loaded the dishwasher, and either redoes it or makes that side comment. And just like that, you feel deflated. Why bother, right? Let me validate both sides here because this is actually a two-way street. If you're the one who has been carrying that mental load for years, you've developed specific systems. You know where everything goes. You know the most efficient way to do things. And watching someone else do it differently, especially when you're already exhausted, can feel like more work, not less. There's actual anxiety in letting go of control when you've been the one holding everything together. We see this in business all the time. The entrepreneur builds an amazing business and starts hiring people to take over a domain in a department. And then they can't let go of the control of letting that person actually run with the success or the learning of that domain. This is no different. And if you're the one stepping into ownership at your home, it can feel like nothing you do is good enough. You're trying, you're showing up, and the feedback, even if it's well-intentioned, feels like criticism. And the temptation is to just stop trying, right? And say, fine, you do it then. Both of these reactions are understandable, and both of them will destroy the progress you've made if you let it. So here's how you navigate different standards without going to war. First, separate the critical from the preferential. Some standards are about safety, they're about health, or genuine family well-being. The kid's medication needs to be given at the right time. The car seats need to be installed correctly. Those are non-negotiable. But how the towels are folded, how the dishwasher is loaded, whether the bed is made with hospital corners, those are preferences, not requirements. And both partners need to be honest about which category their standards fall into. Secondly, the person letting go of control needs to practice the 80% rule. If your partner is doing the task at 80% of your standard and the outcome is safe and functional, let it go. I know that's hard, but the alternative is that you keep carrying everything yourself and resentment continues to grow. The 80% rule is a trade-off for sure, but it's a good one. Third, the person stepping into ownership needs to be coachable without being managed. There's a difference between your spouse saying, hey, the kids are allergic to that detergent, can you use this one instead? And your spouse standing over your shoulder directing every move. The first is helpful information that you should learn to act on. The second is micromanaging. If you're getting helpful information, receive it with gratitude. You do the same thing in business. You're about to make a business move and someone comes in with information that totally changes the equation. Learn from that, be grateful for it, and move on with that knowledge. If you're being micromanaged, that's a conversation to have gently. You could say, I want to own this and I need some space to figure it out my way. Can we agree on the outcome and let me find my process? Again, you do that in business every single day. The definition of done is agreed on. The process of getting there, maybe it doesn't have to be. And then fourth, give it time. When you first take over a domain, there's going to be a messy middle. There's going to be lessons learned, that things will get missed. The quality might even dip, and that's normal. It's part of the learning curve. Don't use the first 2 weeks as evidence that the new system doesn't work. Give it at least a month before you reassess. And here's the mindset shift for all of this. Stop thinking about household tasks as chores that need to be done right. Start thinking about them as acts of love that need to be done together. When you reframe it that way, the towel folding argument looks a lot less important than the fact that you're both showing up and building something together. Let's talk about one of the hardest realities for families like ours. It's the juggle, because even when you've divided the domains, even when you've aligned your calendars, there are going to be weeks where everything collides. It's part of life. It just happens. The business has a crisis that requires your attention. Your kid has 3 activities in one day. Your spouse has their own deadlines. Someone gets sick. And suddenly it feels like you're all running in different directions and nobody's connected. This is where most couples default to survival mode. Heads down, get through the week, and hope there's time to breathe on the other side. And granted, there are times to put your head down and to just go. But on a continual basis, in survival mode, connection is the first thing that gets sacrificed. So how do you make your spouse feel supported and cared for when life is at its most chaotic? Here's what I've learned. It's not about doing more. It's about doing more specific things that communicate, I see you and I'm with you. Let me give you 5 practical moves. 1, the proactive check-in. Don't wait for your spouse to tell you they're overwhelmed. Reach out in the middle of a hard day and say, hey, I know this week is brutal. What's one thing I can take off your plate today? Not, let me know if you need anything, which puts the burden back on them, but a specific proactive offer. One thing today. Number 2, handle the thing they hate the most. Every household has tasks that one person dreads. Maybe it's cooking the nightly meal. Maybe it's dealing with the school pickup line. Maybe it's folding the mountain load of laundry. When you notice your spouse is running on fumes, take that one dreaded thing and just do it without being asked, without the fanfare. When they realize it's already been handled, that's when they feel cared for. Goes back to part of the 5 love languages. Number 3, Protect their recharge time. And this is huge. When things are chaotic, your spouse needs time to just exist without being needed by anyone. So create that space for them. I've got the kids Saturday morning, sleep in, go to the gym, curl up on the sofa and read your book, whatever you need. And when you say that, mean it. Don't text them questions while they're gone. Don't call to ask where the sippy cups are. Just handle it, figure it out. That's what ownership looks like in action. Number 4, words of recognition, not just acts of service. Again, this goes back to the 5 love languages. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is, I don't know how you do everything you do, and I'm really grateful that you do. Specific recognition is even better. The way you handled that situation with our son today was incredible. You were patient when I would have totally lost it. When your spouse feels seen for the invisible things that they do, it fills their emotional tank in a way that no amount of dishwashing can. And number 5, stay connected for 2 minutes a day. This again comes from the Boss Dad framework. Even on the craziest days, you can find 2 minutes for real connection. Look your spouse in the eye, put your phone away, and ask one real question. How are you actually doing today? Not the task list. How are you? 2 minutes. That's it. And those 2 minutes will do more for your marriage than an hour of shared chores, because they communicate that your spouse is your priority, not just your co-manager. If each of you prioritize these 5 things on a consistent basis, yeah, it'll fall through the cracks for sure. But if you prioritize these 5 things for each other, it will absolutely transform your marriage. I also want to mention something about grace during these sessions, because there will be weeks where the split isn't even. There will be times when your spouse has to carry more because your business demands it. And there will be times when you carry more because your spouse is going through something. That's not failure. That's partnership. The goal is never perfect 50-50 split at all times. The goal is a relationship where both people are genuinely trying, genuinely communicating, and genuinely caring about the other person's experience. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today, and I want to make sure that you walk away with something a little more tangible that you can actually do, not just something to think about. So, fellow boss dads, here's your action plan. And I want you to take this seriously, because this is how real change happens. Not in grandiose gestures, but in small, consistent shifts. This week, do one thing. Have conversation number 1, the awareness talk. Tell your spouse what you've realized, that you see the mental load they've been carrying, that you understand the difference between helping and owning, and that you want the process to change. Don't propose solutions just yet. Just see them and make them feel understood. And then next week, take ownership of one domain. Pick something specific. Maybe it's meals. Maybe it's the morning routine. Maybe it's bedtime. Whatever you choose, own it fully. Anticipate, identify, decide, and monitor. Don't wait to be asked. Don't ask for instructions. Figure it out and run it for 2 full weeks. You're the entrepreneur for a reason. You've figured out a problem-solving solution for the customers that you cater to. This is no different. It's the same thing at home. Within the next 2 weeks, start your weekly family sync. Pick a time on Sunday and set aside 15 to 20 minutes. Walk through the week, celebrate a win, pick one priority, and try to make it a consistent rhythm. Within the next month, have conversations 2 and 3. That's the domains talk and the standards talk. Map out who owns what and talk honestly about what good enough looks like. What is the definition of done? And agree to give each other grace during the learning curve. It's going to take it all. And that's it. Guys, that's the playbook. And if you do these 4 things over the next 30 days, I promise you the dynamic in your home will start to shift. Not because you've become a perfect partner. We could never be held to that standard. But because you've become an intentional one. And intention is what separates a guy who helps from a man who leads. I know that's been a lot, but let me leave you with this because I think it's the most important thing I'll say today. Your kids are watching. They're watching how you and your spouse interact with each other. They're watching who does what around the house. They're absorbing every single day what a partnership looks like. If your daughter watches you take initiative at home, own your responsibilities without being asked, and treat your spouse like a genuine equal and a genuine partner, she will grow up expecting that from her future partner. She won't settle for someone who sits on the couch while she manages everything. You will have set that standard for her. If your son watches you show up as a true co-leader of the household, communicate openly, handle conflict with respect, and prioritize your family, he will grow up knowing that real strength isn't about dominance or avoidance. It's about showing up fully. You will have modeled that for him. And that's the legacy piece. This is what we call the 940 Saturdays in the Boss Dad framework. That's roughly how many Saturdays you have from the day your child is born until they turn 18. And every one of those Saturdays, they're learning from you, not from what you say, but from what you do. The way you share the load at home, the way you treat your spouse, the way you handle the mundane, unsexy, invisible work of running a household, that is your legacy. It's not your revenue. It's not your job title. It's the answer your kid gives years from now when someone asks, "What was your dad like?" And I want the answer to be, "My dad was a real partner. My mom never had to carry it alone." So here's what I want you to do right now. If this resonates with you, if you felt something today, don't let that feeling fade. Take action. Start with the awareness talk tonight or this weekend. And if you want a complete system for becoming the kind of leader at home that you already are at work, for scaling your business without failing your family, check out the Boss Dad Challenge. It's a 5-day challenge designed to give you the frameworks, the tools, and the community to orchestrate harmony between your business and your family. The link is in the description below, or go to beabossdad.com. And one more thing, share this video with a dad who needs to hear it. Not to call them out, but to invite them in. Because we're all figuring this out together, right? And the more dads who see the invisible load and step up to share it, the stronger our families will be. You've got this. You're not a bad partner. You're just a good partner who needs a better system. And now you have one. I'm Joel Haasenritter. Win at business, win at life, be a boss dad.